in the School of Communication. And I'm going to be uh, having the pleasure of facilitating the conversation we're going to have with our two guests. And I'll tell you a little bit more about them and then about what's going to follow in a second. But just to give you some background on how this event came to be, the School of Communication has a Race Matters initiative this year, which is called Race and Communication Exploration. So RACE Matters. And we were granted an award through my office, the undergraduate student office, to put on a speaker series to get feedback from students about how they are experiencing racial representation in media. And in order to facilitate that conversation, we thought we would bring in some people who are working in the field and experiencing what it's like out there, which you are all hopefully going to do soon, and hear from them, and then have a facilitated conversation with a speaker, with a facilitator who is named Whitney Maddox, who is here with us as well. So she will be getting some feedback from the students after our speaker session. So we'll have we'll go until about 7:40, 7:45 with our guests, and then all of the students will be able to join breakout rooms to talk about what they heard and what that means for their own experience and suggestions that they have for our school in terms of how we can address some of the issues that were brought up. So with that, why don't we get started? And let me first introduce our speakers, and if you can just give a little wave or make flash something when it comes up. So let's first start with Sunny Mason. Sunny B. Mason is a native of Washington, D.C. After his time in the Air Force, he was hired by the district government as a still photographer. After spending more than 30 years in still photography and video production for the city, he now works as a freelance commercial and industrial photographer. Mason's artwork has been included in national and international group shows, the State Department's Arts and Embassies program, and he has been represented by District West Fine Arts in Leesburg, Virginia, as well as by Parrish Gallery in Georgetown here in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us, Sunny. We're really excited to hear from you.
Thank you for having us.
And Ahmed A. Best was a founding member of the acid jazz group, The Jazz Hole, and starred in the Broadway musical Stomp. He then went on to be the first CGI lead character in a motion picture, starring as Jar Jar Binks in Star Wars: The Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith. He's the executive producer of the DL Chronicles GLAAD Award winner for Best Anthology Series, co-director of the web series Bandwagon, creator, writer, and director of the web series This Can't Be My Life, and the sci-fi comedy The Nebula. Ahmed is addicted to culture and devoted to the future. And we are really looking forward to hearing from you as well, Ahmed. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for reading my resume. Hopefully I can get a job out of this.
And what I learned from our, chatting before everybody came in is that I didn't really read very much of your resume. You have a lot of other things that are going on too. So why don't I start with you, Ahmed, and ask what resonates across your wide-ranging professional experience as a Black artist, from starring and touring in the musical Stomp to becoming Jar Jar Binks? Those are, there's a lot in between there. So what has your experience been like as a Black artist in the field?
It's a very interesting dynamic walking into the rooms that I walk into, because my Blackness always precedes me. Even though I don't make it a thing, it's always a thing when I walk into the room. The difference between, starting when I started, which was really at a time where there was quite an abundance of money and interest in the arts, and I'm talking like early 90s, where a show like Stomp, which was a very kind of unorthodox downtown theater type of show, would be able to achieve the accolades and attention that it achieved. So, um, as a Black artist, I think economically, where we are as a country really lends itself to how we are perceived. When there is an abundance of ability, when there are quite literally jobs available, who you are and what you can bring to the job is a lot more important and well regarded. When we're living in a time of scarcity, then we tend to back into the tribalisms of what divides us, right? So the most difficult part about being a Black artist is, especially in times of scarcity, is the assumption that you can't do the job. And the hardest part is, especially as an actor, every time you walk in the room, you have to prove that you can do the job that you just did, that made a whole bunch of money and made a whole lot of people rich. That isn't you. So it's challenging emotionally to be able to perform in a room where your experience isn't as regarded as you think it should be. There are a lot of advantages for being a Black artist as well, as opposed to being like a Black software engineer or being a Black, you know, uh, you know, rocket scientist. I have to shout out a really close friend of mine. Her name is Tracy Drain, and she's a Black woman who works at NASA JPL, and she was the lead systems engineer for Mars Perseverance, which landed on Mars today, right? And nobody knows who she is, you know, and she's one of those people who, when you meet her, you are absolutely blown away and taken aback by her because she is that impactful, and you recognize that we could have a lot more Tracy Drains if not for stereotype, if not for the idea of who we are perceived as when we walk into the room. And so there's this constant battle of overcoming the ideas of what others have of you. And that makes the ability to make art a lot more challenging. And when you are a Black artist and you decide to do something artistic to feed your family as a profession, there has to be this level of extraordinary in you emotionally so you can just go on, so you can continue, so you can make your art despite of the stereotype.
And how do you, from your experience, channel that extraordinary within you, or overcome that emotional challenge that you talked about?
It's not easy. It really takes mental toughness, and it takes a good group of people that you can share your experiences with to help you through those times. It's never as simple as it looks. Yeah, we have all of these things on our resumes of all the things that we've done, but that's not without the arduous task of having to show the world that you doing this is not anomalous. It's actually the norm. And the perception out there is the wrong perception, right? Your perception of you doing the thing is the right perception. I'll kind of make this analogous to President Obama's term, right? President Obama was extraordinary as a human being, extraordinary. And he was an extraordinary president, right? And he knew he was extraordinary. His predecessor was everything but that, right? And so the perception of the office is now different, right? Because of who followed President Obama. That's what we're fighting as artists when we walk into a room, right? the idea of who they think we are, right? And this ability to have to be extraordinary just so that the perception of us is on par with someone who is not.
Or someone who's ordinary. Huh, interesting. And Sunny, I want to turn to you now, actually, with the same question: is, you know, what has your experience been like as a Black photographer in a field that, you know, is not full of many, many, many uh, stories?
Yeah. I came to photography and came to my current, I guess you could say, level of expertise in this by selling my abilities. When I came into photography through the public sector, which means I was hired by the city government when I got out of the Air Force. And I finished a term at LA Trade Tech, where I took commercial photography. But I knew when I got out that journalism and documentary work was not for me. I appreciated the people who were doing it, but I had no passion for that. I basically wanted to make pictures rather than take them. And my whole background started out with view cameras, if anybody knows what they are. The big camera with the guy behind it with the cloth over your head. That's how I worked. That's what I learned on. And I made pictures one at a time. When I came to the government and I presented my work, one of the comments was, we've never seen work like this in this market in Washington. And that was mainly because Washington is an event town. It's a town for journalists pretty much, and a town for photographing celebrities and whatever, and congressmen or whatever, government. I didn't go that route. I photographed large water plants, large treatment plants, large pumps as big as a room, and basically things that did not talk back. I could take my time and do it and create the kind of images I wanted to make. Ahmed had a good point though. You have to prove yourself every time. Every picture I take, I had to prove myself. I had to deliver. They never saw me to start out with. They saw the work first, and then when I walked in, to some instances, I could tell they didn't think I was a Black person. It was because I'm in a technical field, and they didn't see a lot of that here. So I had to continue to put out, had to continue to have a mindset to be the best that they had seen. I already knew I could do it. This was not hard. I've been trained for it, and I had a passion for it. If you have a passion for something, you're going to be excellent. If you don't have a passion for it, you should be doing something else. Okay? And because I had a passion for this kind of photography, I was able to excel in it. It even got me into other doors. For instance, when they built the metro system here in DC, I photographed some of these stations from a hole in the ground till they put a train on them from 1975 until sometime later. And the director of Metro called me in when I first got in there, and I thought he was gonna fire me or something. I was still working for the government, but I was on leave doing doing these other assignments. And he said, "We've never seen work like this before, and we want you to do X, Y, and Z and X, Y, and Z station." And I said, "What do you mean you never seen it before? You got 15 other photographers here doing this work." He said, "But you're the only one that goes down in these tunnels and holes with a camera on a tripod and lights that we've never seen. For one thing, I use flash bulbs. Nobody ever knew what a flash bulb was, okay? But the flash bulbs I used were 100-watt bulbs that screwed into an old Graflex gun that are strung all the way down the tunnel, and one picture, that's it. And then you pack up and go home. But they put out more light than a strobe. But most people never even knew that because they didn't know what a flash bulb was. They didn't know about light. They didn't know about the technical part of photography. So that's how I got in. And that's how I worked for 30 some years. And I worked for, because of Metro, I got work from Bechtel International, which was a huge firm that did construction work, doing the same kinds of things, photographing infrastructure. That's what I like to do. Now I had some cohorts, some friends that were in photography that were doing stuff up on the hill, journalism and, documentary work. They were struggling. It was hard for them as Black people to break into a white man's world. And that's what some of them managed to do. I have several very good friends who did very well with that. Sharon Farmer, for instance, ended up being Bill Clinton's White House photographer. That hadn't happened before, and George Talbot worked in the Senate as a photographer. That hadn't happened before. So they broke in, but they broke in because they were good at what they did, and that's it.
So, it sounds like you were able to create a niche for yourself too. So,
Exactly.
finding your own passion, your own thing that really set you apart. Going back to this idea of having to be the best, really having to sell yourself. For from what both of you have said.
Mhm.
What advice would you have for students today in terms of how do you sell yourself? And how do you always make sure that you are, the best, and presenting yourself in that way so that you can get the job.
The students today are coming out into a different world, and they are really in a much better place than what I was in the 60s and the 70s when I came out. There were not vehicles to get your work out there. The vehicles were Life magazine, Look magazine, a couple other magazines in order to get your work out in terms of journalism and documentary work. Well, today you have the internet. Your work can go out without being censored, without somebody saying, okay, you can do this. You don't have to have their permission to do it. You are on your own. You are responsible for your success or failure, because you can go out there and create the market for yourself. That wasn't available in the 60s and 70s. You had to rely on somebody to give you a break. You were not in charge of your destiny. Today, you pretty much are. If it wasn't for the internet and the good side of social media, okay, because it does have a downside, you can create your own market. You can reach the world, where before in the 60s and 70s, if you were, say, a fine art photographer, you had to rely on a brick and mortar gallery. How many people are going to see your work? 100, maybe. Photographers that came out, say James Van Der Zee in New York, who was doing Black portraits. Who was going to see his work? He worked in Harlem. Nobody saw it. We saw it because that's where he worked. Today, you have what? Carrie Mae Weems. She's producing images from her aesthetic, from a Black aesthetic, from Black people in a regular life that nobody's ever seen before. So you don't have these stereotypical images. On the other side of the coin, not just to do with race, but has to do with gender also, because women had just as hard a time as Black people to try to get in, to try to get recognized. People like Deborah Tuberville, maybe nobody knows her, but she was a fashion photographer, but she started out in Vogue magazine, but when they let her take pictures, she brought the feminine perspective to fashions that nobody had ever seen before. So she made people money, okay? And you get people in the industry that make you money, they tend to forget who you are, you just make them money. That's all they want you to do. Ahmed had a good point. People that you make money for love you, okay? They don't care who you are. And there's a person that, with your last name, Susan Bernstein. I don't know how many people know Susan Bernstein's work, but she does a kind of dreamy-like photography that had to do specifically with her conquering her night terrors. So it came out of her to produce this kind of work. Mary Ellen Mark, everybody knows her name, but I went to something she had in DC here one time. Her phone was not ringing anymore pretty much because of the internet. They didn't need her anymore, but still she made an impact with a woman's perspective on photojournalism and on documentary photography. So Chester Higgins, I don't know how many people know Chester Higgins' work. He photographed Coptic priests in Ethiopia, had very, very strong Black images that nobody had ever seen before. The list goes on. For instance, Roy D. Carava came out of Harlem, and he got into photography because he wanted to get away from the stereotypical images of Black people and portray the real life Black experience in his home, which was Harlem. So I don't know whether that answers your question or not, but it kind of does, I hope, give it some perspective that yes, these are racial issues, but yes, there are still gender issues. And I think what this country needs to move toward is more inclusiveness, more diversity. Everybody has something to bring to the table. My pictures are going to be different from Ahmed's pictures, from somebody else's pictures. When I first came into the job I'm in today, I photographed workers who were changing a big water pipe in the middle of the street. And I've been out and I looked at the pictures that had been done of them before. And these were all Black people. Some of them couldn't write their name well. When you asked them to sign something, they signed with an X. But they did excellent work at what they did. And the photographs that had been made of them prior to me, I didn't really care for. It did not give them the credit they were due. So what I did was I made a point of taking a big camera on a tripod out to the construction site, and I asked them to pose for me to make that picture. They were happy to do that. Somebody finally paid some attention to them. So I brought a different perspective to that job. And I kind of heard about it later. They said nobody did that. In fact, they said the white photographers would be out there and do it, and they barely paid us any attention at all. So everybody has something to bring. That's all.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna, I think, Sonny, you said that so incredibly well. I've very little to add to it. I mean, firstly, the pressure of being the best and being better than everybody is actually not fair. Having to have to be, and Black children hear this all the time from their parents. You got to be 5 times better. You got to be 10 times better than your counterparts in school because of how they judge you, right? That is not right.
That's right.
And we shouldn't hang our hats on having to be better than them. We should hang our hats on having to be our best selves. Nothing really is going to change until the gatekeepers change.
Right.
The people who are in charge of saying that this art is public, this art is presentable, this art is worthy of cultural and societal recognition, and the playing field is leveled because of the internet. And I think that's a fantastic point, Sonny. We all have these distribution models in which we can put out our work and deem ourselves worthy and drive traffic to that work. What I tell my students at USC is have a voice. That is the most important thing that you can have as an artist. You do not have to be technically proficient. You do not have to have all of the I's dotted and the T's crossed and all the bells and whistles. I get a lot of, when I'm teaching my film course, I get a lot of what camera should I buy? And I usually say the one that takes pictures, because it doesn't really matter what camera you have if what you're pointing it at doesn't say anything to me. It doesn't impact me emotionally. And as an artist, we're in the emotional business, right? We're in the behavior business. We want people to feel what we're putting out, whether it be positive or negative. At least you feel something, right? So the most important thing that young people and young artists, especially young Black artists, should know is you have agency and permission to have your own voice, and they have to deal with you, not the other way around.
Exactly. I agree with that. Exactly. There has to be a passion for your work, and the passion will drive your voice.
100%.
Yeah.
So without
If you don't have a passion, you're not going to have a voice.
100%.
And to make that voice heard, number one, you have to be proficient at your craft. If you're not proficient at your craft, your message is not going to get out, at least not the way you would prefer it to get out. So I agree with everything you said. You know, you really, what the young people today, they have things, they have advantages that we didn't have. You have the ability to get your voice out, but you have to do that, and you have to create your own style and your own voice, because there are millions of, and this, I'm speaking in terms of photography, there are millions of images uploaded every day.
Yeah,
How are you going to stand out from that?
that's right.
How are you going to be recognized from that? Create a niche where you can fit into it and you run the show.
Yeah,
If you don't do that, then you're going to get lumped in with everybody else just because your picture was sharp and you had nice colors and things like that. But that doesn't mean that it evoked any kind of feeling. People have to feel the image. I'm totally right. People have to feel the image, not just see the image. I had to get out of my own way when I first started this, because I was all tied up in technical. And then I looked at my pictures, and my instructors looked at my pictures a few times. He said, Mason, these are damn good, but they don't say a damn thing, you know? And that's what I had to get past. I had to learn to try to get a message out. I had to get emotion. If an image or production, it can be a film, it can be a painting, it can be anything. If it doesn't get people, if it doesn't get people's attention and go straight to their heart, it's not going to succeed. So,
And how did you learn that? How did you learn to find passion and find emotion? How did you, both of you, go about, you know, fostering that in
I got
yourself?
it by looking at other photographers' work and other artists' work, because there's more things to watch than photography. And then I had to analyze why I like something and why this struck a chord with me, as opposed to this, this great technical piece that was totally sterile. And I turned out a lot of those. Okay. So I had to find out what was lacking in my work. So I started looking at people's work, and a lot of Black photographers' work. Like I mentioned, Roy DeCarava earlier. He was one of the early people I looked at. And of course, Gordon Parks. Everybody knows Gordon Parks' name.
Yeah.
Gordon Parks was a very interesting man and a very interesting photographer. And he actually got into photography because he read people. He knew how to do things. He knew how to get people to do things. And you can look up his entry into photography. Everybody will know it, but I'll give you kind of brief thing. He went and applied for a job. He said he could take these pictures for a fashion piece, for a paper, and the guy wanted them the next day. He said, okay, I'll do that. He went, but he had never operated this 4x5 Graflex in his life. He didn't know anything about photography. He went in there and blew a smoke screen and came away with a job. And once he went out and shot it, he had 10 or 15 images on 10 or 15 sheets of film, and only one came out. Everything else was nothing. So he had to go to the client the next day and sell that one picture. So he went to the client the next day and said, I shot this, and I have to admit, this was the strongest image. I didn't like the rest of them. I wasn't going to bore you with the rest of them. So this is it. They bought it. Okay. But that gave him the wherewithal to have faith in himself and go back and pursue the craft. And he turned out to be an extraordinary photographer and artist. But you have to have faith in yourself to do that. And you have to look at other things. I had to look at other things. I mean, it was more than just technical. You had to get a feeling for the work. And once you got the feeling for it, then you could put the work out. And hopefully other people would see it. Not everybody's going to like it. I don't care whether they like it or not. That's kind of a, crude statement, but I want it to have impact.
Yeah.
Okay. If they're in the middle on it, then I haven't succeeded. If they hate it, I have succeeded. If they love it, I have succeeded. Suppose I took a picture of a red truck and everybody said, oh, that's a great red truck. And this one person over here, that thing is so terrible. Come to find out, this person, when they were growing up, got hit by a car that was red. Well, the rest of their life, they're going to think red is terrible.
Right.
We see through our experience.
Yeah.
We produce our pieces We produce our work through our experiences. And I think that's very important for anybody coming up in this industry today, to project your experience. If your experience was kind of rough when you were growing up, then you need to put that out there. If your experience was taught you something, you need to put that out there, because we see through our experiences, and our art reflects our life. Every time I take a picture, that's a portrait of me, not of the person. It's a portrait of me and how I see them. So with that, that's pretty much how I changed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fortunate. I have been trained as an actor, so with that that type of training, you're really open to every emotion, and you know how to find those emotions within characters and within text that's not you. So as far as being able to transfer those emotions into the other things that I do, there is a way to do it. You can actually train your emotional intelligence, right? And use that as a way to capture what you are trying to capture, regardless of artistic medium. And it really is about finding, what I call your emotional engine, which is the thing that makes you go. And a lot of times, if you take your 5 top, you know, things that move you emotionally, those things usually boil down to the same thing. There's only just like one thing. And when you recognize that thing, when you recognize that one emotional engine, you can apply that to everything that you do. And it'll elicit an emotional response. And people will feel it from you. But, I teach actors filmmaking at USC, and that's what I teach them. I teach them how to take that acting training and be writers, be producers, be directors, be cinematographers, because that superpower, that ability to feel and behave, is what you're trying to get your audience to do, right? And as an artist, especially as a filmmaker, you can really manipulate the feeling of your audience if you're in tuned to that. So there is a way to train your emotions to be able to produce the emotional response that you want the audience to have when you do something. You have to A, want it, and B, realize that you're worthy of doing it. That's the hardest part. And I think, Sonny, what you were saying about getting out of your own way, that's the key, right? Because we all perceive ourselves in a way, and it's mostly through the lens of those who are perceiving us, right? We don't really see ourselves the way we are. We want to see how we present ourselves. And in acting, as an actor, you're taught and trained out of that, right? Because you have to be able to express things without being self-conscious. The hardest thing about being on stage or being in front of a camera with everybody looking at you and all the lights pointing at you and everything happening at you is you start to get self-conscious, right? So a lot of actors don't know what to do with their hands. You see a lot of people just like kind of moving around, and they're not settled and they're not sorted in their bodies. And that's you thinking about how you are being perceived, right? You can't really get to the good stuff. You can't really get to the nitty gritty of who you are until you're able to put that aside, right? That's the idea of the ego and the id, right? You have to get the ego out of the way,
Yeah.
And once the ego is gone, then you can have this lived experience and you can be vulnerable. And vulnerability is so incredibly attractive. Anytime an artist is vulnerable with their audience, you bring your audience in. And that's what we want to do. We want to bring you in. If you are not vulnerable, you're not being honest, and you can spot dishonesty a mile away.
Well, thank you both for this great conversation. And I want to make sure that we have some questions from the audience. So please do throw them into the chat, and I will try to get them asked to the presenters. But as things are populating in the chat, one more thing I'm thinking about from both of you would be, we've heard a lot of great advice for our students, but what advice would you have for us as a school of communication, as an institution that is fostering talent to put out into the field? How can we contribute to a better experience for our students of color who are going into the field, and also to the point about gatekeepers? How do we work with our networks to try to open the gates more, to create a more inclusive field of communication?
Go find the students and make school free.
Make school free, okay? And going to find the students, you mean going out there and looking for the students rather than trying to just get them to come to us, be more proactive about getting out
Yeah,
there
I
and finding
mean,
them?
a lot of times, you know, when I was in high school, I had a mentor of mine who was a wonderful human being. His name was Bob Danzig, and he was the CEO of the Hearst Corporation. And his son and I went to high school together. We were best friends, and so I would go to their house quite often, more so to like eat, because they had like food that my mother wouldn't let me eat. So I would just like go there and eat Diet Coke and corn pops. And Big Bob would, we called him Big Bob. His name was Robert, but Big Bob would always be sitting at the kitchen table, and he'd always want us to sit down and talk, right? He was like one of the first few older adults who would just like talk to us 14-year-old punk kids eating all his food. And I remember when he was talking about Jason Blair. I don't know if you all remember the Jason Blair incident at the New York Times, right? Where he fabricated all of these stories, young black writer, fabricated all these stories. And at the time, the New York Times was a Hearst paper. And he was getting a lot of flack. And we were talking about it. And he said, Ahmed, one of the things that is really disappointing about this Blair case, one of the things about this guy is, when you're black with talent, everybody wants you. And that really gave me a cause for pause. I was like, Big Bob, I've been black for, about 15 years now, and I don't feel that, right? I don't feel that on the ground. It took me about 20 years to recognize that he was right. And the reason why he was right is because, and the paradox of it, there are so few people in certain positions who are black. And that's because the gatekeepers don't go and look for them. They always say the same thing. We want more black people. We just don't know where to find them. And I always tell them the same thing. Go out and get them. Look, where are you looking? If you're looking at the Harvard Law Review, if you're looking at the Yale, sculling team, you're not going to find them, right? The gatekeepers are there to not have more black people in those arenas, right? You have to go to where the talent is. I'll tell you one place that seems to find them: college basketball. They go. There are just as many software engineers and computer programmers in the hood as there are basketball players, but you're not looking there, right? So you have to go out, you have to actually make the effort, because it's very difficult, and I'll, probably most of the black people on this thing know this. A lot of times, especially in conversations like this, we're talking to mostly non-black people. There are so many instances where we are the only black person in the room, and we have to all of a sudden speak for black people. It's not fair. And it's not fair to the people who have to do that. And not everyone has the capacity to be able to do that, right? Not everyone has the courage or the wherewithal or even the patience to have to do that, right? So when you have these white spaces, I'll call them for right now, that are not friendly to a lot of black faces and black places, you're going to have less and less amounts of black people going to these white spaces. If you're looking for black people in white spaces, you're not going to find them. You have to go to the black spaces to get the black people. So go out there, right? Don't think that you're so phenomenally fantastic that they're all going to come flocking to you. You know, higher education costs money. You have to make it accessible, and you have to make them know that you want them there. That experience is valuable.
Thank you. And oh, go ahead, Sonny.
Yeah. What you asked, what can the school do?
Mm-hmm.
In the corporate world, it's public-private partnerships. The school should look at things like that to get its finger on the pulse of the industry and see how it can provide applicants to the industry. The industry may come to the school to see who you recommend. You need to, because the student can't do that. The student's too busy trying to get through your program. And they are thinking that once they get through your program, then they're going to be marketable. Well, yes, but they don't know where to go to get jobs. But if you have your pulse on the industry and you and the industry are having a conversation constantly, then you know what's needed. It happens in the automotive industry. It happens in all kinds of manufacturing, where the manufacturers look to the institutions to provide the people they need. Go out and find out. The school needs to go out and find out. Is your curriculum what's needed to prepare your people to go out and make a living? When I was coming up in this, I looked at a couple of things. I looked at Art Center in Pasadena. I looked at Kodak School, and Art Center was going to teach me art theory, and Kodak was going to teach me some other theory. But Brooks Institute was going to teach me nuts and bolts. I wanted to go to Brooks. I couldn't afford Brooks. I didn't have time for art. I needed to make money. So I went to LA Trade Tech. They taught me the mechanics of being a photographer. And they went out to some industries and actually said, we have these people that are going to be coming out of our class. Can we send them to you? Will you talk to them? That's what schools need to do. Keep their finger on the pulse of what for lack of a better term, what the world needs, because we're now into a world workforce. We don't have a little small workforce here. We need to look bigger. And if the schools can keep their finger on the pulse of that community, then they can better prepare the students to go out and make a living.
Thank you. We have a couple of great questions coming in too from the chat. So here's one. In regards to how I'm perceived, is there a difference between being an excellent Black journalist and being an excellent journalist who happens to be Black?
I can't talk to the journalist part, but
yeah,
you need to be an excellent whatever. If you go in there perceiving yourself as a Black journalist, they're going to receive you as a Black journalist because you're going to give off that vibe. If you go in there and I am a journalist and I can do this for you and I am proficient at what I do, they're going to see you like that. You may have to go through several layers of people before they do see you like that, but somebody will. But if you go in there and say, I'll take my own experience. I never presented myself as a Black photographer. I'm a photographer. The work speaks for itself. And I kept that mindset my whole time. I knew good and well I was Black, and I knew good and well I was Black in a white world, but I didn't project that. I went in there, I'm the best person for the job, and you need to hire me to do this. And 8 times out of 10, I got the job because of the work. So how you perceive yourself is what you're going to get.
I agree with that. I think, this kind of goes to having a voice, right? I see a lot of pitch decks for a lot of shows as a producer, and there are a lot of shows out there that are very similar to one another. And the show that you usually attach yourself on is the show where you recognize that the team bringing you the show is the only team that can do it. So it really is about your work and making that work personal, regardless of whether or not you're black or you just happen to be black, like it just snuck up on you like a goddamn poltergeist. You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
What matters is you're the only person who can bring this work, and it is personal, right? I think the thing that made Gordon Parks, because he's one of my heroes, is you knew it was a Gordon Parks photo as soon as you picked up the magazine.
That's it. Yeah.
As soon as you picked it up, you were like, that's a Gordon Parks photo. You know, it wasn't, oh, that must be a black photojournalist. Oh, a black photographer. Because you didn't just take pictures of black people, right? But as soon as you picked up the magazine, you saw the voice. That's what you want.
Going back to the voice, the passion.
I know. I feel like I need to turn my chair around with a buzzer.
Another question from the audience: how do you think non-Black people in the industry can help foster more equitable environments, allowing a diversity of people to succeed?
I love this question.
Mm.
You know, a lot of times people who aren't black people ask black people to solve racism. It's not our problem. We didn't make it. We didn't create it. We didn't bring it to Africa and put it in chains and bring it all over the world. Non-black people are going to have to figure that out. You know, what you're really talking about is a system of oppression that we can fit into and make it palatable. And what I think we all have to realize, and this is some of the work that I'm doing as an Afrofuturist, we have to realize that systems change and systems end, and be okay with that. Right now, we are witnessing the American system changing. We are witnessing it ending, right? We are operating in a 1776 system that's moving in the pace of Moore's Law. It's not going to work, right? It's going to give, and people are pushing back, right? You set up an oppressive system, people are going to get oppressed. Rome fell. The Vandals came through, right? So you cannot ask black people how you can foster a more equitable environment. That is not a question for black people. We didn't create the system.
Mm-hmm. I agree. It's totally right. The system is changing, and change is very difficult for people. Not black people. We're used to it. The non-black person that you're alluding to, Justin, is they have to make a decision for themselves. Are they going to be a part of the current system, or are they going to be a part of the future? And to make the future equitable for everybody, people have to change. People change the system, and the people have to change. If they don't do that, we're going to be stuck where we are now. And what one of the things that came out of the Black Lives Matter, a lot came out of that. What you're seeing now didn't just happen in the last 6 months or a year. It happened in the last 100 years. Yeah. And it's been boiling up to this point ever since. But now you have an opportunity for change. I'll even quote, believe me, I never do this. They asked the Pope about the election and what happened. And he said, an evil in America has been exposed. Now they can deal with it.
Yeah.
He was right. Evil has been exposed, and now they can deal with it. It was always there, but it was never out in front where you could make things happen, where you could change things. And this country has a lot of problems, and probably not in our lifetime are we going to see it flourish to what it can be. But only through these kinds of times can change start to happen. And it's people's voices that make them happen. And I keep going back to this, you have the internet at your disposal. You can make your voice heard, you can get your products out, You can get your art out. You can force change or be a force of change. And I think that's where we need to be.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the thing that's been resonating for me since January 6th is a quote that Dr. King made famous. And he said, the aftermath of nonviolence is the beloved community.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, as this person who is putting out art, which I believe is the heart and soul of society, right? It's a mirror to society. It's the conscience of society. And as someone who does futurist forecasting and futurist thinking, I constantly question, what am I building for? What am I creating towards? And the answer is the beloved community. And what is that? That is a place where every creature on this planet has the ability to thrive without oppression, right? That's the beloved community. That's what we're doing this for. And if you are supporting something that isn't building the beloved community, then you're supporting something that is a system of oppression.
Mm.
And those systems of oppression end in violence. And the aftermath of nonviolence is the beloved community.
Mm.
And that's what we have to build towards, I think.
Well, that's, I think, a great way to wrap up this conversation. And I really want to thank both